From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
She spoke about him in glowing terms. And the main thing that she left was one point that she said whenever she told him I love you, his answer to her was, not as much as I love you.
As funerals begin for the victims of last week's shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary School, will the Newtown massacre lead to a new way of thinking about guns? We'll go to another Newtown in another country, Australia.
Shockwaves around the world as the toll from the Port Arthur massacre climbs to 35.
Boom, baby, and then we found out was 4 dead here, 2 dead there.
Police arrest the gunman. Now the questions. Why did he do it? And why was he allowed such a deadly weapon?
The gunman behind the 1996 Port Arthur massacre was from Newtown, Australia. Within days, Australia, a country of hunters, passed the strictest gun control legislation in its history. There have been no mass killings since. Then, Academy Award-winning filmmaker Michael Moore, the director of Bowling for Columbine, responds to the Sandy Hook massacre.
You know, other countries, I mean, they have their crazy people, and they have people, they've been shootings and killings in Norway and France and in Germany. But there haven't been 61 mass killings like there have been in this country just since Columbine.
And the NRA Facebook page has gone dark. We'll speak with Lisa Graves about big guns and big money. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Residents of Newtown, Connecticut have begun holding the first of many funerals for the 27 victims killed in Friday's shooting rampage at Sandy Hook Elementary School. On Monday, Noah Posner and Jack Pinto, both 6 years old, were laid to rest in small caskets. More funerals are slated today, including 2 more 6-year-old victims, James Mattioli and Jessica Ricos. At the White House, President Obama convened a meeting with top officials to discuss ways to respond to the Newtown massacre, including potential proposals for gun control. Pressed for details, White House Press Secretary Jay Carney refused to offer any specifics on how Obama plans to address the nation's gun violence.
It's a complex problem that will require a complex solution. No single piece of legislation, no single action will fully address the problem.
In the aftermath of the Newtown massacre, a number of pro-gun lawmakers are signaling a new willingness to soften their opposition to restrictions on weapons. On Monday, Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia, a longtime advocate of so-called gun rights, said when it comes to gun control, quote, everything should be on the table. Virginia Senator Mark Warner also said he would back stricter rules, calling the massacre a game changer. Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid, also a pro-gun lawmaker, said the massacre will prompt, quote, a meaningful conversation and thoughtful debate about how to change laws and culture that allow violence to grow. In a statement, Democratic Congressmember John Yarmouth of Kentucky apologized for being, quote, largely silent on the issue of gun violence, adding, quote, I'm now as sorry for that as I am for what happened to the families who lost so much. At a news conference, New York Mayor and gun control advocate Michael Bloomberg urged meaningful action from Washington.
Gun violence is a national epidemic and a national tragedy that demands more than words. We are the only industrialized country that has this problem. In the whole world, the only one. And that's why we need immediate national action from the President and from Congress. It should be at the top of their agenda. Because what happened at Sandy Hook Elementary School was sadly no aberration.
We'll have more on the Newtown massacre and gun control after headlines. The White House has issued a new offer to House Republicans in the ongoing talks over avoiding the so-called fiscal cliff. On Monday, the Obama administration disclosed it had submitted a proposal to House Speaker John Boehner that would extend the Bush-era tax cuts for households making under $400,000 rather than the $250,000 limit that President Obama has long sought. The offer also floats a lower revenue target of $1.2 trillion trillion, down from $1.6 trillion. While Obama has offered to cut some $100 billion from military spending, he's proposing to cut even more from Social Security, $130 billion, by adjusting the inflation index for Social Security benefits. The White House says the Social Security cuts would come with safeguards to protect the most low-income recipients. The Syrian military surrounded a Palestinian refugee camp in Damascus one day after launching airstrikes that killed at least 8 people. The standoff at the Yarmouk Palestinian refugee camp could see new fighting between Syrian forces and rebels controlling the camp. In Bahrain, government forces cracked down on a pro-democracy rally in the capital Manama Monday, firing tear gas and arresting demonstrators. Among those detained was Yusuf al-Muhafeda, the acting head of the Bahrain Center for Human Rights, whose founding president, Nabil Rajab, is currently serving a 2-year sentence. The U.S.-backed Bahraini monarchy banned all public demonstrations earlier this year. New figures show the Obama administration's conducted more than 200,000 deportations of parents with children who are U.S. citizens over a period of about 2 years. According to federal data, nearly a quarter of all deportations from July 1st, 2010 to the end of September were issued for parents with U.S. citizen children. Color Lines reports the data appears to dash hopes that new guidelines issued for deportations last year would curb the separation of families by Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE. The prosecutorial discretion guidelines instruct ICE agents to focus on certain immigrants, including those with criminal convictions, and to consider a person's ties to the country and, quote, whether the person has a U.S. citizen or permanent resident spouse, child, or parent when making deportation decisions. A group of New Jersey residents who say they're subjected to surprise pre-dawn home immigration raids has reached a settlement with the federal government. Most of the plaintiffs were either citizens or lawful residents of the United States when they say armed immigration and customs enforcement agents entered their homes without warrants nor their consent. Some agents allegedly rounded people up from their bedrooms and issued threats and intimidation in a bid to arrest those living in U.S. without documentation. One permanent resident said an agent demanded to know where the non-existent, quote, illegals were hiding in her home and pointed a gun at her 9-year-old boy's chest. The plaintiffs were awarded a total of $295,000 after filing the case in 2008. The pattern of raids apparently emerged from a policy implemented in 2006 called Operation Return to Sender, under which teams of agents were ordered to increase their arrest quotas by about 800% over the course of a year. The Obama administration later removed the quotas. A Tennessee county linked to the discriminatory treatment of teenage African-American suspects has signed a landmark agreement to reform its practices. On Monday, the Justice Department said it had reached a deal with local officials to overhaul juvenile justice in Shelby County. A report earlier this year found black teens were twice as likely to be detained than whites and were often sent to adult criminal court for minor offenses. Juvenile suspects also attempted suicide at record rates and were detained in harsh conditions, including being tied to restraint chairs and left alone for far longer than allowed by law. Under the agreement, Shelby will be forced to carry out a series of reforms to avoid future lawsuits by federal prosecutors. A federal appeals court has overturned the convictions of 2 former New Orleans police officers involved in the fatal shooting of an African-American man shortly after Hurricane Katrina. The first officer, David Warren, was convicted of shooting 31-year-old Henry Glover with an assault rifle. But the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals has voided Warren's conviction, saying his trial should have been held separate from those of 2 other officers charged in the case. Another officer convicted of burning Glover's body after he bled to death, Greg McRae, also saw a key charge dismissed. Glover's death was first detailed by investigative journalist A.C. Thompson of ProPublica. A federal appeals court cleared the way for a lawsuit filed by peace activists in Olympia, Washington, over spying by a U.S. military informant who infiltrated their group. Declassified documents obtained by Students for a Democratic Society and Port Militarization Resistance revealed a man everyone knew as John Jacob was in fact John Towery, a member of the Force Protection Service at Fort Lewis, Washington. When Democracy Now! Broke the story in 2009, one of the activists, Brendan Maslauskas-Dunn, said Towery had personally admitted to the spying.
He admitted that, yes, he did in fact spy on us. He did in fact infiltrate us. He admitted that he did pass on information to an intelligence network, which, as you mentioned earlier, was composed of dozens of law enforcement agencies ranging from municipal to county to state to regional, and several federal agencies, including Immigration Customs Enforcement, Joint Terrorism Task Force, FBI, Homeland Security, the Army, and Fort Lewis.
The exposure of the spying also led to disclosures of intelligence gathering and sharing about the activists by the Air Force, the Federal Capitol Police, the Coast Guard, and local and state police. In a landmark decision, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals has now ruled the activists can sue military officials for violations of the First Amendment and unlawful spying. In California, an Iraq War veteran has filed suit against the Oakland Police Department for injuries sustained during an Occupy protest last year. Scott Olson suffered a fractured skull and was placed in a medically induced coma after authorities fired non-lethal projectiles into a crowd of demonstrators. You can go to our website at democracynow.org to see our interviews with Scott Olson. And Democratic Senator Daniel Inouye of Hawaii has died at the age of 88. The most senior member of the Senate with 49 years in office, Inouye was the first Japanese American to serve in either chamber of Congress. He set in motion the process that ultimately saw the U.S. apologize and pay compensation to victims of Japanese internment during the Second World War. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. Thanks so much for watching this report from Democracy Now!, your daily independent global news hour. We don't accept advertising or corporate funding, but rather rely on donations from viewers like you. Please make your contribution by visiting democracynow.org. We need your support today to keep bringing you this hard-hitting, in-depth reporting.